When talking about the career of the prolific late musician David Bowie, a lot of emphasis is put on his constantly switching phases that encompass both musical genres as well as personal aesthetics. From glam to krautrock, people are well acquainted with his various personas who would externally encapsulate those changing eras. Who can forget characters like Ziggy Stardust, Aladdin Sane, Halloween Jack, or Cobbler Bob?
Cobbler Bob! Bob is a cobbler!
What's curious about this, however, is that while the whole persona thing is seen as very distinctively Bowie, it was only really connected to his relatively brief glam rock period during the first half of the 70s. Sure, people may cite Major Tom, though that's more of a recurring personal motif than any role he ever firmly inhabited. Likewise, the Thin White Duke should probably be contextualized as an effect of Bowie living in the darkest period of his life, rather than some edgy act he put on because it would be funny. What we're getting at is that past the reinvention of the Berlin era, as he entered his 30s, David seemed content with being, well, David. Of course, he would continue constantly switching up his moods, but his presentation from here on out was as a more down-to-earth adult figure. After all, the big commercial stunt with the whole persona concept had already been pulled back in 1973, when Bowie blurred the line between performance and the performer by figuratively killing off Ziggy Stardust on stage. The trick had already been done once, and after that it was more the playful aesthetics of wearing an eye patch. That's why it's so curious when almost every time this subject of Bowie personas is brought up, someone chimes in with the outlier. Jareth, the Goblin King of magic dances. Surely he counts, right? Well, sure, maybe. He's certainly a character, but not in the same way Ziggy was. To evaluate Jareth's legality as a certified Bowie persona, perhaps we need to take a step back for context first. Labyrinth is a 1986 fantasy adventure film directed by Jim Henson, the guy who done did some puppets at one time. The film tells the story of a teenage girl who journeys into a mystical dream world to rescue her kidnapped baby brother, and it's also coincidentally the best film ever made. It really was an all-star collaboration with George Lucas as executive producer, a screenplay by Monty Python writer Terry Jones, and of course, David Bowie as both supporting lead and songwriter. How one approaches Bowie's involvement in Labyrinth is interesting though, because there seems to be some sort of divide here, possibly generational. You see, at release, this film wasn't actually that successful. Not only did it underperform at the box office, it also received very lukewarm reviews, which in the industry means death on both fronts. This means that in more formal context, the film is apparently just glossed over because it simply wasn't immediately successful. Take any Bowie biography and Labyrinth will at best get a few dedicated lines and, at worst, be a brief footnote. Wow, David Bowie sure was in a film that one time. Look at him being all film. But why is this? The easy explanation is that the average writer of Bowie books will focus strictly on his purely musical career and leave the rest to the wayside. Labyrinth was just some kids' film smack dab in between the albums Tonight and Never Let Me Down, also known as the ones everyone hates. Like, come on, he puts on a goofy wig, flexes his crotch and sings a song about a baby. Gee, embarrassing. The soundtrack wasn't even Bowie-centric, with half of the runtime being shared by some other guy, effectively negating the release from a proper place in the discography canon. Didn't you get the memo? Instrumental tangents only count when it's Brian Eno. By regular metrics, Labyrinth was an underperforming side gig in one of Bowie's least interesting eras, where he embraced a broader mainstream appeal. And in that context, its significance is equal to Dancing in the Street or that one time he sang Do They Know It's Christmas. Him being an evil wizard in some Muppet movie is just a point in a laundry list of arguments for why his career took a turn towards the predictably indulgent during the 80s. That's the critically accepted narrative when analyzing his work in a broader context. After his absolutely bonkers 70s output, there was a clear shift that has to somehow be explained in simple terms. So the standardized approved viewpoint became that Bowie sold out. He lost his spark, became a predictable celebrity and never returned to his glory days. But this is clearly not the one and only view on the matter. We know there's a reason why you clicked on this video, and that's because you're statistically likely to think Labyrinth is a fucking awesome movie, with an iconic Bowie performing the #1 geek party banger. There's a whole generation of kids who grew up with worn-out Labyrinth VHS tapes who will hear the name David Bowie and immediately think, "You remind me of the Babe."
What Babe?
The Babe with the power.
What power?
The power of voodoo.
Voodoo?
You do.
Do what?
Remind me of the Babe.
A summer babe!
Anyway, it's clear that Labyrinth, much like its masterpiece sister film Dark Crystal, achieved the status of being a cult classic in the years following its release, with the broad appeal of the film being equally connected to both the Jim Henson Company and Lucasfilm, allowing audiences to sort of intermingle in that stewing pot. For any kid, a puppet fantasy romp with cool set pieces and fun scenarios is a certified exciting time. That it's a gateway to the rest of David Bowie's career is just a bonus you get with the package. And even if you didn't check out the rest of his stuff, that exposure means you're at least familiar with the Bowie numbers from the film whenever the artist is brought up. Because evidently, Labyrinth as a film attracts a different audience than Bowie as an artist. Of course, there will be a significant and growing overlap, but essentially this means that Labyrinth is the one Bowie outing a lot of people are the most familiar with. And that's not just speculative, it's an observable case. Decades after release, the soundtrack was apparently the third best-selling Bowie album on iTunes, which is pretty darn impressive for a brief footnote, don't you think, author name? There's a clear conflict in audiences here. For some, Labyrinth is seen as an iconic career highlight for David Bowie, with Magic Dance as one of his most recognizable songs. For the rest, it's absolutely overshadowed by his other work, almost bordering on obscure. Despite the power of memes allowing anyone under the age of 35 to recite all of Magic Dance when prompted, the song is mysteriously absent from practically all the 5 billion Bowie compilation albums out there. Really? Not even on the best of 80s CD? You gotta admit, that's pretty darn ridiculous. The song barely even got a single release, only netting itself a limited maxi single that actually doesn't even include the regular Magic Dance you'd want to hear. Instead, you get a dance mix version which sincerely sounds like the record is broken.
Slap that baby, slap that baby. Slap that baby, slap that baby.
It's safe to say that a song like Magic Dance became iconic through more indirect means than the usual easily tracked single charts or radio play. Kiki, for example, got into Bowie because someone sent her a YouTube link to the scene from the movie. Then they shared MP3s on MSN. That shit sneaks under the radar. Effectively, Labyrinth is like a long game time bomb for a generational clash. It was a seed to future generations, many who probably weren't even born back in 1986, to eventually discover David Bowie's career. I think a lot of people had Labyrinth as that gateway discovery via love for 80s adventure films. The songs have a great range of being catchy, fun, groovy, grandiose, and beautiful. It's not a great leap from watching this film, grooving out to the tunes, finding out Bowie is actually a highly regarded musician, and checking out the rest of his catalog. It's probably to be expected that this would happen to a majority of young viewers. I mean, if your parents showed you this film as a kid, well, They're probably Bowie fans. Labyrinth is practically a vehicle for presenting Bowie in a vacuum, and the fact that so many people take a liking to these songs is either evident of his ability as a songwriter that his lesser material would elicit that reaction, or perhaps more relevant, that these songs are actually good and form an important part of his career. You know, just fucking saying. And just for added context here, in writing this video we have read what a couple books and articles from trusty sources have to say about Bowie's involvement in the film and the greater meanings towards the songwriting. And unless we just missed something, this seems to be quite uncharted territory. It's mostly the same ideas that are recited, like how Bowie did the baby voice in Magic Dance and everything surrounding the costuming ideas. Most helpful was the Complete David Bowie by Nicholas Pegg, which was endorsed by Tony Visconti, co-producer of many classic albums such as Low. And while providing some needed trivia and context, there are little actual readings of the material in here. Instead, it often gets needlessly dismissive of the film, like how the characters are straight up referred to as Muppets continuously. And like, no? That's a trite oversimplification that reveals a lot about how this sphere seems to engage with the film. When we jokingly said that earlier, it was hyperbole. You wouldn't see Kermit hanging out with the Chamberlain and Hoggle, you know. Because why would you? The only thing approaching honest fair analysis of the Bowie material came from the Labyrinth visual guide by the Jim Henson Company. And even then, it feels like something they did more for completion's sake than any sincere untangling. Lyrical lines are taken at literal face value and attributed directly to the narrative of the film, which feels stilted and half-hearted.
Next time on Labyrinth, the lyrics suggest that Sarah is far stronger than Jareth anticipated, and it's really beginning to vex him.
Basically, we had little help actually getting any real guidance with appreciating and legitimizing the film and its music to any deeper extent from the actual writing that has been made about it previously. So, let's rectify this. Let's acknowledge the relevance of Labyrinth in David Bowie's career to the millennial part of his audience by treating it with the seriosity it deserves. Let's disregard sales metrics or reviewers and carve our own path here. We have the power to reshape the narrative. Here we go. Let's pull out our trusty PSP and pop in that old UMD. It's time to analyze Labyrinth. First things first, it should be acknowledged that David Bowie's work on Labyrinth cannot sincerely be taken in anything resembling a vacuum. Obviously, we can enjoy the soundtrack on its own, but it was written for the film and meant to be presented in that context. There is a potential issue to be taken here, yes, in that Bowie had to work within a formal narrative that wasn't directly written by him. It's easy to suggest that the songwriting has been compromised in this sense, that Bowie was just following a script and doing songs on command, like it's not 100% genuine. And like, sure, even though Jim Henson gave Bowie free rein, there was still a definitive framework in place. However, it feels disingenuous to devalue that work because of the conditions. It's still a Bowie musical. He did have a fair share of creative control, and that influence on the narrative is obvious. No, he may not have written this story, but his songs absolutely enrich the emotions of the present themes, directly affecting the film, and that unavoidably makes the story in some way his. Through that structure, Bowie's is the one voice that comes through with the most clarity in both senses. It's still a symbiosis, but one that has been slightly overtaken by Bowie through his sheer pervasive presence. And by that metric, it's absolutely vital to read the film as a whole when talking about the songs, because that's the filter through which they are meant to be seen. That's the context. And it's a fortunate one. Rarely are we given this much to work with. It's practically an open target ready to be taken down. The overarching theme of Labyrinth seems to be the boundary between childhood and adulthood. It's your classic coming-of-age story where the journey of life has been presented as a fantastical spectacle. Our teen protagonist, Sarah, rests on this precipice, unable to fully take that leap onwards. She longs for the independence of an adult, but lingers in the comforts of a child. The themes of childhood and adulthood are explored through different vehicles. They are shown through various symbols and expanded through additional themes. Core to the conflict is taking responsibility. Sarah gets into her predicament when she is upset about taking care of her baby brother Toby, resulting in his kidnapping. And the rest of the film is about solving this mistake, where in the end she has gone through the growth of accepting and taking care of him. With this setup and outcome, we are able to understand a lot of the values the film places on the concepts of adulthood, such as parenthood, selflessness, sacrifice, and moving on. If the eponymous Labyrinth is meant to be the path through childhood into maturity, the conclusion of leaving that world behind in order to care for the next generation is what the film would posit as true adulthood, or the most ideal one. And this is vital for understanding the dynamics of how the film uses what we might call a false impression of adulthood to mislead Sarah, which is mostly represented through her outlook in the beginning of the film, but also the core philosophy of the Goblin King Jareth. He's the seducer hell-bent on leading Sarah away from her true path, trying to persuade her into his idea of adulthood that the film is presenting as essentially stagnant in the comforting world of childhood. Because the Labyrinth is also the manifestation of her childhood, and he's the king of it. In other words, Sarah learns to find her truth of what adulthood entails, while Jareth is the representation of her childhood trying to rope her in for his self-preservation. Simple stuff, really. Even if that's not abundantly clear on your first viewing, the sheer entertainment value of the film makes it an easy and rewarding rewatch, which allows the audience to notice the small details that ultimately enrich the messaging. Most obvious would be the detailed set of Sarah's room that foreshadows the entire adventure, which is mostly emphasized in the opening, so on repeat viewings this set gains a sense of familiarity. The more times we've watched this movie, the more intrigue is aimed at that neat bedroom, as the abundant details reveal more about the protagonist. It's feasible that one's personality would be exposed by their living space, and that assumption is key to giving Sarah a certain depth. She has surrounded herself with fancy toys and pretty knickknacks that grant the room a certain fantasy fairy tale theme. There's a clear sense that childhood and adulthood is wrestling here. The vanity mirror with the pictures and newspaper clippings imply a focus on something completely different than playthings. Sarah having a stepmother suggests that these pictures and mementos are connected to an absent mother, and the baby brother imply that this sudden jarring life change is recent. Something unknown happened that left this growing child lost, and now the memory is gaining influence in that representative space of her childhood. That the titular Labyrinth is a manifestation of the belongings in Sarah's room is the sort of thing that feels like a nifty detail at first glance, but on second thought, it reveals that this magical place has immediate relevance to Sarah's life experience. It is quite literally her inner world that she must now untangle and overcome, and the conflict present within that room is the basis for the issues she's confronted with inside the Labyrinth. Through what we learn about Sarah via her room, it's clear that this world has been sort of tailor-made for her. That's also why it's so alluring and ultimately tempts her, because with this being her world, it's also a space that's deeply appealing to embrace. The labyrinth is multifaceted in that way. It makes sense to call it her inner world, it makes sense that it is one representing her childhood, and it makes sense that traversing this land would then be the journey of life towards adulthood. Through it, Sarah learns to understand and accept parts of herself, the virtues of being humble, of showing forgiveness, and taking responsibility. Perhaps best represented through the companions she makes on her quest, and how together they overcome their own shortcomings. Hoggle is a traitor who learns loyalty, and ludonarrative dissonance is a coward learning bravery. Sir Didymus doesn't have any overt flaws, but he certainly presents a lesson for asking permission. These warriors of light apply a very direct yet intrinsic meaning for solving the labyrinth, and as such, they help Sarah by getting to the right place in both senses of the word. The labyrinth traversal as a process is one of growth, and ultimately, it follows that Sarah would also understand that she inevitably has to leave it behind to fully mature. The distinction being that a proper labyrinth has no branching path. Now, you may look at this and say that it's just a simplification of language or a snappier title. Of course, we understand that these two terms are commonly used interchangeably, but luckily, the etymology doesn't obstruct potential readings. Rather, this knowledge enriches the meaning of the film, as it may imply that the labyrinth is such in a metaphysical sense. You may walk along the branching paths, but ultimately, you'll get to the other side regardless of which way you take. The goal is, in other words, inevitable. Perhaps from this perspective, the path through the labyrinth isn't about finding the right way, but rather about finding the right way. Morally. And hey, wouldn't you know it, Sarah takes the literal right turn every time she meets a fork. Clever.
I said, don't go that way.
The first half of Sarah's journey through the labyrinth is dotted with small roadblocks that either establish the rules of the world or present small life lessons through comical situations. To get into the labyrinth, she needs to ask the right question. To progress, she needs to stop taking things for granted. Things aren't what they seem. The shield doors present a riddle that Sarah solves, but in her victory, she becomes arrogant and is punished by the labyrinth. This happens every time someone says piece of cake, by the way. The wise man gives Sarah advice for how to progress, and in return, she makes a voluntary contribution. The door knockers tell her you need to knock to enter, showing politeness. There are numerous little details we may expound upon with these scenes, but mostly they feel like light-hearted comedy key sequences that establish how Sarah's reaction to opposition slowly changes. What we find most interesting among these segments is the scene with the Fairies in the forest, mostly because it's a Bowie-written song number, but also because it's good. Essentially, this is a gang of bros who chill out in the woods, entertain themselves through self-harm, and then get hostile when Sarah doesn't want to play the decapitation game, ending the scene with her running away from them. Through their song, we learn that they are leisurely creatures content with doing nothing. Think small, it's the only way. The whole concept of taking off your head has the connotation of turning off your brain, not thinking. It's the easiest path to no worries, because you can't reason. Perhaps the most revealing is the following line. Don't got no problems, ain't got no suitcase, ain't got no clothes to worry about, ain't got no real estate or jewelry or gold mines to hang me up. Taken on its own, this can infer the idea of no belongings meaning no problems, specifically no wealth. In context, however, this also fits neatly with a child's perspective of adulthood. clothes, real estate, and jewelry are symbols associated with work life, committing to that adult self-presentation, where you have to play a certain role and start thinking about real estate bills and, I don't know, gold mines, money, income. The Fire Gang promote a comfortable life in passive stagnation as a rejection of adulthood. At least their very naive interpretation of adulthood as a world of nothing but struggles and problems. However, in this unwillingness to face personal growth, they're literally falling apart. The symbolism is clear. They have no integrity or stability because they never learn to develop it. They're at a dead end, believing they can hide in that childhood bliss forever by opposing adulthood. But in the end, they're only hurting themselves. It's a definite pitfall on the road to growing up, an admittance of defeat. You either go on with your life or stubbornly stay in the forest forever. A distinct element to this whole performance is of course the concept of the characters disassembling themselves in grotesque and horrifying ways. And while a more generalized reading of this linking to their integrity is reasonable, we also want to highlight the focus on this as a hurtful act, comically exaggerated. A curious part of their identity is the name Fireys, or the Fire Gang. The mutilation aspect is introduced by one of the creatures ripping off his hand and using it to fuel a fire, marking a sort of symbolic start to their activity. They're figuratively playing with fire here, which can pull you in all kinds of directions, but that's neither here nor there. We digress. What's important is the idea of this as a peer-instigated lifestyle, a perpetual loop of cheap thrills. They don't seem to have a leader, yet they clearly demand everyone to join in, while having rules held in place by firm countermeasures. When they sing about having a good time, it comes off as insincere, like an obvious lie that has turned into a mantra of self-assurance. Depending on how you read things, you could even discover a darker underbelly to the song relating to this. So when things get too tough, and your shin is dragging on the ground, and even down looks up, bad luck. Of course, one might see bad luck as a summation of previous statements, but we chose to interpret it as a shrugged, tough luck kid. The only response found in the song is that reaffirmation in the wild lifestyle, painting it as hollow and superficial. Sadness and hard times are given no place here because they're problems, forbidden problems. The presented cure is fooling yourself into a forced happiness, participation in an endless cycle of hurt. Perhaps the real horror here isn't the literal self-mutilation, but the philosophical idea behind it. The dead end is miserable, but given no vocabulary to address itself other than terrifying ignorance. The structural placement of this scene is fascinating, as it reveals a deeper relation to Sarah's journey. The Fireys show up almost at the exact middle point of the film, and with the conclusion of their song, both the film and the labyrinth have taken a new shape, where the walls and winding paths are gone and replaced by more open landscapes. Hoggle lifts Sarah over the wall, carrying her past the boundaries that previously limited her. A firm turn has been made in tone and presentation. In other words, it's safe to say that the Fireys act as a conclusion to the entire first half of the film, presenting a confrontation echoing the very same sentiments Jareth presents Sarah by the end of the second half. Stay in your childhood world and embrace that blissful ignorance. However, Sarah rejects the offer, at first in terror, but later with confidence. These are milestones to show her development. She always has the right idea. That's clear by her hesitation at the start. But her resolve changes. She learns to overcome this offer again and again until the temptation has run dull. The test of the first half of the labyrinth is overcome. And with that, the second half reveals itself. Temptation is a recurring theme within Labyrinth, or rather it's a prominent means of conveying conflict. From their first to last encounters, Yaref tempts Sarah with the labyrinth dream world, and within that space, he will also manipulate others like Hoggle to do his bidding. In conjunction with the Fire Gang encounter, Hoggle is given a poisoned peach to feed Sarah, which plays into the core conflict of his character. To be brief, he's just not very good at being loyal to anyone, which is explored with the peach, where his loyalty to both Yaref and Sarah is tested. Yaref exerts his will on Hoggle through intimidation, while Sarah is merely asking for his help, even giving him gifts in exchange. Part of Hoggle's growth involves falling to his lowest level before regret guides him towards redemption, which would be the part where his fear of Yaref makes him betray his friend for his selfish needs. It's the scene where Hoggle gives Sarah the peach, the forbidden fruit, a classic biblical symbol of that temptation again. Don't worry, Hoggle makes up for it later. Sarah takes the fruit and is led to a party that is concluded with a whirling fallback to her senses. This is the song number for As the World Falls Down, where Sarah and Yaref tail each other at a masquerade ball before dancing together. The romantic nature is obvious, the seduction absolute. But there's a disillusionment here that results in Sarah's desperate escape by violently breaking the crystal walls of the small bubble world. Again, this scene is about that temptation. Yaref obstructs Sarah's path, wasting her time by distracting her with what could at least be assumed to be her inner wishes. As events unfold, it can be inferred that the bubble world, or rather the musical box reflected within it, symbolizes a sort of idealized grown-up role for Sarah to inhabit. The filmmakers continuously call this a very adult setting for her, and that makes sense. The party as a concept is an important gathering for young adults that places them in a confrontative adult role. You need to actively play that part to fit in, a drastic measure that can escalate into disillusionment. In the sense of Yaref as the carrier of the superficial, the definitive optics of adulthood, but this is clearly on appeal to all aesthetics. The Crystal Ball Party is curiously absent of puppet characters, making it feel disconnected to the rest of the labyrinth. They all look very adult, made up with their external presentation, serious. But there is no actual substance or meaning to this as a form of maturity. When we say Yaref offers a sort of false adulthood, it's because his is a rejection of the responsibilities demanded by such a position. In many ways, Yaref shows us that there is indeed a path to growing up without actually having achieved any personal growth. And we suppose that's what staying in the world of the child ultimately comes down to in a more direct real-life context. That growing up is an internal process of assuming a certain role, and not related to outwardly aesthetics. In fact, this is subtly reflected by Sarah's outlook at the beginning of the film, where she uses lipstick as a tool to assert herself to her father. A strong but superficial symbol of adulthood for a woman. Further on, it's literally used as a guide when traversing the labyrinth, where she marks her path to not get lost. But it quickly ends up being revealed as ineffective and unreliable. The path to adulthood does not just involve dressing the part, it's deeper than that. Which would be why she also rejects this idea inside of the crystal ball, because she has already learned that lesson and cannot be fooled by it. The lyrics of As the World Falls Down seemingly reflect a very emotional confrontation with this concept, with the scene featuring no dialogue and the performance being almost entirely non-diegetic. It perhaps reflects more on Bowie himself than Yaref as a character, with him perhaps narrating the vibe of the scene rather than conveying the words directly upon it. It is certainly a song that could do very well on its own. It even got a cool music video directed by the guy who made basically all of them in the 80s. Although, it was sadly never released. Shame. The narrative within the song itself seems to be told as a sort of love story about a crumbling relationship. Terms like a fooled heart beating so fast clash with every thrill being gone. Observations of the recipient are juxtaposed with stereotypical romantic utterances like, "I'll place the sky within your eyes," or "I'll place the moon within your heart." The narrator clearly wants to support and be there for the interests of his love, even if that activity is their love falling apart. Poignant is that breaking point where even the heartfelt promises are colored by the breakup. A great irony, which is certainly echoed within Labyrinth as a whole, as The World Falls Down is honestly just a really cool title that becomes a recurring motif throughout the film. It of course reflects the emotional disillusionment in the scene, but also works as a mantra for Sarah's eventual escape, which is to have that crystal ball world fall apart. Likewise, the false return to her bedroom afterwards ends on the song returning in the form of a music box, which leads to the whole room falling down on itself. And finally, at the conclusion of the film, the labyrinth, Yareth's world, is falling apart. Yet he still desperately pleads to be there for Sarah, no matter how futile, echoing the narrative of the song itself. It is certainly an interesting concept, and as a thematic anchor point for the story, it feels important to also point out how the song in itself concludes on a rather mature departure. That realization of the need to let go, the emotional confusion of wanting to stay but understanding that there is no place left for you. It is certainly relatable, but also a fitting parallel to the surrounding events of the film. As Sarah wakes up after the Venetian Bowie rave, she finds herself in a junkyard with no memory of what she was doing, which is a regular old part of growing up. Her baby brother Toby is absent in all senses but an inexplicable call for urgency.
I was searching for something.
A garbage collecting lady tries to distract Sarah by handing her a familiar teddy bear that she looked for at the beginning of the film, before pushing her into an exact replica of her bedroom, a false return to her home. However, a change has occurred, not to the room itself, but Sarah's outlook on it. It has grown distant to her, the ramifications and responsibilities of her quest altering her disposition. Even if she can't remember why she's here, that growth means that she can't go back to that old mindset, to that old world. The bag lady, so twisted by the burdens of the junk she's carrying that it overtakes her physique, tries to distract Sarah by forcing the toys and trinkets in the room on her. The materialistic nature of these knickknacks is made apparent. They carry memories and connotations of childhood. But they're nothing more than that. The bedroom is merely a monument of symbols. The use of items in this sense is a very relatable one. We grow fond of possessions and like to keep them as mementos, not letting go even if there is nothing more to them than a stale familiarity. And so we drown, not only in the blatant materialism, but also a false sense of comfort. As the lady piles on an increasing amount of toys, there are two items in particular that stick out. Firstly, the lipstick, being referred to as a treasure.
Yes, go on, put it on, make yourself up.
This creates a clear juxtaposition. The clashing of childhood and adulthood we mentioned earlier are conjoined and projected upon Sarah. But as we also established, these are all superficial ideas of those worlds. Clinging on to the artifacts of childhood will not make you remain in it, and merely adopting the aesthetics of adulthood carries no deeper meaning. In this sense, Sarah is confronted with a character flaw that had been rooted in her since the very beginning of the film, the one represented in the bedroom. That the conflict of the child and adult was always a non-substantial one, conveyed through empty symbols rather than any deep conflict. In truth, she was neither, just an awkward teenager with a futile missing of childhood and a longing for a false sense of adulthood. These preconceived ideas of what growing up means and the burdens of the hurt caused with it are literally piled onto Sarah's physical baggage. Much like the old lady, she's slowly being turned into a walking manifestation of that empty conflict. with hollow words of futile reassurance raining down on her.
It's all here. Everything in the world you've ever cared about is all right here.
But Sarah sees through the facade. She realizes that the symbols of childhood cannot bring her back to the innocent world of the child. It's all junk, so she rejects it. However, with a sly look, the old lady brings out her secret weapon, the music box. A little doohickey representing Sarah's dream world, the place she got pulled into when tempted by Jareth. And it plays as the world falls down. God, I love this movie. We feel safe in saying this stands in opposition to the other toys of the room as a symbol of that adulthood Sarah longed for. Yet the lesson she learned from that disillusionment in the previous scene made her realize that this impression of adulthood was a misguided one. So in a jolt of clarity, Sarah destroys the music box, rejecting both the superficial world of the child and adult. And with this, the path forward is made clear. Her friends call from the opened hole in the wall and she is greeted with the city at the center of the labyrinth. Her growth is finished. Sarah understands what needs to be done, what is expected of her. And with this, the only thing left is to assert her newly assumed responsibility and reclaim her baby brother from Jareth. As the goal of the journey, Toby carries a lot of symbolic weight to Sarah's growth within the narrative. A broad theme is that of responsibility and the consequences surrounding them. Sarah needs to take care of her younger brother, yet in the beginning she shows contempt for him, and his state is almost uncomfortably distraught. Gene Siskel even honed in on this point in his scathing review, arguing that
the sight of a baby in peril is one of the sleaziest gimmicks a film can employ to gain our attention, but Henson does it.
And sure, it's a bit uncomfortable. Toby's father even commented on it. At the same time, we all get why this is here, right? We all understand that it serves a purpose and paints a clear picture. Sarah's frustrated relationship with her brother is what causes him to be kidnapped to begin with, because he specifically asked the Goblin King to take him away, placing blame and fault on Sarah. It follows then that by the end, she has reached a higher sense of maturity to right this ill. Remember, it's not just about reclaiming Toby, but rather to grow beyond this initial mindset towards him. A striking specificity to this theme of responsibility within Labyrinth is also that of parenthood, or caretaking. This is perhaps the most apparent relationship between adult and child, with the parent role acting as some ideal form of the grown-up that Sarah strives for. Now, this is obviously not her baby, but the symbolism is sound, as Toby is used with both her and Jareth to signify their role as stand-in parents, and clarify how their outlook differs. So, let's get to Magic Dance, the iconic villain song about baby reminders that everyone loves, and we obviously tackled out of order. In the overall structure of the film, this acts like an upbeat pacebreaker that helps define Jareth's character. After Toby's incessant crying at the beginning of the film, the Magic Dance song helps cheer him up and keep him jovial for the rest of the story. And that's mostly all of what the song is about, thinking about ways to make a baby happy again. As such, the motifs follow that idea. The whole voodoo, hoodoo, you-do bit is commonly attributed to being a reference to the 1947 film The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer.
Hey, you remind me of a man.
What man?
The man with the power.
What power?
The power of hoodoo.
Who do?
You do.
Do what?
Remind me of a man.
What man?
The man with the power.
But Bowie authority Nicholas Pegg claims this is rather a playground chant that was merely popularized by the film, and although we can't verify this, we choose to take his word on it. It certainly follows with the motif of slime, snails, puppy dog tales and makes the lyrics more coherent to that theme. In that light, the narrative of the song is breaking up the situation with little nursery rhymes. Yaref exudes typical dad energy by trying to win Toby over through light-hearted fun, a very direct and sometimes effective measure that is probably a bit one-dimensional. One certainly gets the feeling that Bowie's personal parenting experience is somewhat reflected here. The struggles and hardships of learning your way around the ropes with a malicious spin. He definitely plays that dad part in the scene, and the story behind the recording is adorable, with him comforting Toby with a puppet. Is Magic Dance at face value necessarily a negative song criticizing this sort of parenthood? No, absolutely not. But Yaref as antagonist with Sarah overcoming him suggests to us that there indeed is more to parenthood than throwing babies into the air. Yaref seems to want to own Toby for rather selfish needs, as a belonging and also presumably as a future heir? Maybe? The impression of adulthood he inherits is, again, a very superficial one, where the role of parent carries no idea of responsibility, or any sort of love or care really. The growth Sarah goes through when traversing the labyrinth stands in opposition to this. The goal is not just to reclaim Toby, but to have her form of parenting win in the end. To prove Yaref wrong, which she does. When Sarah is back in her house with Toby, she tucks him into his bed and hands over Lancelot, the teddy bear that has now become a symbol for her own childhood. The torch has been handed over, so to say. She must give of herself, and this sends a clear message that ultimately the most righteous parenthood is about putting the needs of the child in front of yourself. With this, Toby acts as a firm divider for Sarah, defining her adulthood by him being someone who has to fully rely on her. They are no longer part of the same world like they were in the beginning of the film, when Sarah put her needs as equal or even greater than Toby's. We feel safe in saying this sort of maturity is one of the core components of what Labyrinth presents as idealized adulthood, selflessness and sacrifice. This leads us to that confrontation between contrasting ideas, when Sarah finally reaches the center of the labyrinth. She has fully developed, and the only thing left to do is to prove herself against Yaref and everything he stands for. But of course, the temptation of Bowie continues and reaches its climax as she traverses the Escher dreamscape in pursuit of Toby. By this point, Yaref's role has been made clear and his flaws exposed. Previously, he had been antagonizing and menacing to Sarah, giving the impression that she has no chance against him. But in hindsight, every time he tried to obstruct her, it was always indirect, because, as she realizes, he really has no power over her. It was all intimidation and mind games, a horde of minions following strict orders. Look at him just passing straight through her. What a fucking nerd. The labyrinth is after all Sarah's internal world, and everything within it is a product of her. That's the extent of Yaref. He may be the king of the labyrinth, but that means he's also subservient to Sarah, if that space is indeed hers. And if the journey through the labyrinth is to represent the path of the child towards adulthood, that world is quickly disappearing and made irrelevant. His power is diminishing, and he finds there is nothing he can do to change Sarah's mind. Now that Sarah has found a path onwards, away from that childhood world, Yaref is being replaced. As such, the song Within You is a last-ditch attempt to make Sarah stay in his world. The lyrics sound frustrated as they tell of that uneven power dynamic, of doing everything imaginable to no prevail at all. Yaref is clearly losing, and he knows it. Is this last stand about keeping Toby, or to remain in his safe bubble forever? The effort feels half-hearted. The whole scene is more akin to resignation, as Yaref concludes the song by proclaiming that he can no longer live within Sarah. To reach the ever-fleeting Toby, Sarah understands that she needs to brave the situation and takes a leap of faith towards him, punctuating that previously mentioned sacrifice and marking the firm point where Sarah has not only grown up, but proven herself. With this, the labyrinth shatters as the childhood world falls down. Only Jareth remains as the last symbol of Sarah's childhood and her longing for adulthood. Her deeper desires and lingering in the world of the self, reduced to a ghastly pale form. He's the last roadblock standing in her way to adulthood. The only thing left to do is proclaim his and the labyrinth's role as finished. Jareth pleads for Sarah to hold on to him, but the egg has cracked. Sarah realizes that uneven power gap between them, that there is nothing keeping her from progressing, and boldly states this.
You have no power over me.
She has fully achieved adulthood and left the world of the child behind. The journey is over. It's with this return to the bedroom that Sarah then packs away the memories of her absent mother. Whatever happened there has been overcome now, and there is no place for lingering. She has grown beyond it and become independent. She's tucking away the symbols of both her childhood and yearning for adulthood. Oh hey, listen, is this world falling down as well? Now, we typically imagine that we leave our childhood behind us, but that's not entirely true. Every now and then we need to return to that safe comfort. It's just that now Sarah has a clear view of what was actually important in that world. She discards the shallow material symbols of childhood as they have no real significance. Instead, she finds her friends within the mirror, within herself. Clearly, these guys helped her on the path to adulthood, but they're still products of that childhood world of hers. So when Sarah said she had to go to the center of the labyrinth alone, that was because she quite literally had to leave her childhood behind to reach adulthood. It is a world that is lost, gone, and cannot ever be returned to. Bye-bye, Hoggle! Don't worry, they found him in a suitcase like 60 years later. As they say, they will be there for her when she needs them. Even if she has to go to Alabama to do it. And it appears that Sarah does need them. From time to time, that will just be the case. It's only when we've left childhood behind that we may then look back and approach it from the other end to find what we truly need to take away from it. It's not about the $200 Jareth figurine or the designer Didymus plush from Etsy. It's more deep and meaningful than that. Only through this knowledge is Sarah put in control of her childhood, her internal emotional world. She can call upon it whenever she wants and reminisce. The labyrinth aesthetic is still cool. She doesn't need to drop her dope drip and dress like this. Even when we reach adulthood, it's clear that our childhood still holds importance to us. It's ultimately something we cannot escape, as it is what formed us. That's our foundation. Looking back can be a great comfort, and remembering is important to understand how far you've come. But no amount of cluttered bedrooms can actually bring you back. The labyrinth is truly gone. When she calls upon her old friends, they occupy her own space because that's where they must be, within her world of adulthood, instead of her being within their world of childhood. This closing scene, while striking and heartfelt, is pretty darn goofy, with people like conceptual designer Brian Fraud expressing regret over including it in the film. It certainly would have been a more easy and straightforward ending to just have Sarah leave the labyrinth behind her and go on with her life. But we think this twist of having the labyrinth characters return to her is perhaps a great final statement on the film's themes that complicates them and reaches a deeper level. A question of where the line between adulthood and childhood is truly drawn, and how that conflict perhaps never truly ends. We should know, because we're a bunch of big babies. We end on Sarah still within her safe space, enjoying herself within rich symbols of her childhood, while the owl, a stand-in for Yareth, is locked outside. One could see this as an ultimately healthier engagement with the childhood labyrinth world, now that it is no longer influenced by the underlying presence of Yareth and longing for adulthood. For a moment, Sarah is back in that world, but it is not the same. She has still grown up, as evidenced by everything that has happened in the film.
Even if you get to the center, you'll never get out again.
Fleshing out this ever-continuing conflict between childhood and adulthood is the closing song Underground, which is the main theme and, perhaps by that metric, also addresses what the core theme of Labyrinth is. The lyrics paint a growing conflict of departure and longing. The titular Underground is used as some magical dreamland where everything is always fine. It should be noted that Underground is probably the one song that can be taken the most out of context, and as such, what the Underground actually is within the song is multifaceted. The most straightforward reading in correlation with the film would of course be that it represents the labyrinth, which, as we've elaborated at length, is a symbol of childhood. This conflict within the song, longing for the underground, would then signify how the child's desire for adulthood leads to the adult's lamentation of a childhood lost. There are some strikingly poignant lines in here, like "it's only forever, not long at all." The deceptive ease of growing up is the firm commitment to it. You can never go back. Childhood is perceived as a safe and comforting world with no troubles, but the irony is that as a child, you instead long for adulthood. The grass is always greener, I guess. The lyrics portray this tugging between desires with great emotion. Take me down, get me out of here, I'm underground. Once we've grown up, we can't go back. That old world is gone to us, and even when we had it, we didn't want to stay. For Underground, we may understand that the thesis of the film as a whole is identifying an ideal of adulthood and acknowledging that embracing it is difficult. As a closing punctuation of what Labyrinth is about, it's surprisingly melancholic. Of course, it could be read in many ways. An alternate take could be about how Yareth tempts Sarah with the labyrinth, or I guess, underground. It's that promised wonderland of no care and responsibility, a tantalizing unreal place, a longing that is ultimately dangerous. Regardless, we'd argue that Underground tells of that place we can never return to, whatever it may be. The music video focuses on this by having David Bowie step into the seam between reality and enter that fantastical underground, only to then be tragically locked out of it. And then he tears off his skin. I feel ya, man. What happens after the end? When looking at Labyrinth through a Bowie lens, it's evident that we discover deeper meanings to the themes of the film and greater emotional elaboration in the song numbers. This is stuff that has always been there, but that is perhaps obscured by not honing in on Bowie's voice as it runs parallel with the film. A good question to ask in this regard is how much of this was relevant to Bowie himself. How much of himself did he pour into Labyrinth and its songs? How much of an impact did the film have on his life, and did it hold any meaning to him in the greater picture? And that's probably a bit of a complicated question that goes back to the generational clash mentioned in the beginning. Bowie is sadly not around anymore to ask about this, so a lot of the narrative has to be argued and written in hindsight through a lot of speculation. We don't want to make any firm claims, but suffice to say, we believe that there is some projection going on when Bowie's involvement in the film is glossed over as non-important. What's true is how years later Bowie expressed some regrets on his output during the 80s. A 2002 web interview for Living Abroad magazine in particular had him address the film itself when asked about his most Spinal Tap moment, which, to not be long-winded, is something that would fit into a farce on rock bands.
Oh god, I thought Labyrinth got pretty damn near it, but I was made to do that. What ones did I do of my own volition? That's more telling, isn't it?
This in particular has been used as a weapon to delegitimize the film for David. But we'd say there are other traces that point to a very personal appreciation for the film. For example, the 2001 EP that he made for his wife to coincide with her autobiography, I Am Iman, contains a super slim hand-picked selection of 5 love songs. And wouldn't you know it, among them, we have As the World Falls Down. Furthermore, around the mid-aughts, Bowie contacted Brian Henson about doing a stage adaptation of the film, simply because it was the only project of his that his daughter enjoyed, which of course is precious. But it also shows that he understood the alternate demographic the film had, as opposed to his other material, with no shame in embracing it way past the point where it would have supposedly just been cringe. Or something. In fact, just going back to the recording, Bowie seemed to be very enthusiastic about the whole production. He took great care in writing his material and blowing Jim Henson's expectations out of the water by returning with fully finished songs when he was expecting skeletal demos. There are stories about Bowie just kinda hanging out with the filming crew after hours, drinking and shooting the shit. The whole dimension of even adding songs was something he expressly wanted to do for the project. It was no liability, and by all accounts he seemed to have been genuinely invested in the project and thoughtful about his work on it. Just listening to his compositional ideas for a song like Underground reveals a clear professionalism in everything from genre conveyance and handpicked personnel to considerations on how to get the mastering just right. Really, this is just the sort of stuff we'd expect of Bowie with any album production. We just wanted to clarify it in contrast to how so many books treat the project with a downright shocking amount of disinterest, lazily referring to the characters as Muppets and whatnot. With songs like Chili Down too often reduced to nothing more than sloppy backing for a bunch of dancing furballs, and Underground almost reluctantly given approving nods as a great single release, despite its source. And this just goes on and on. Perhaps the biggest criticism of the soundtrack release is that shared track list with Trevor Jones, who had previously scored The Dark Crystal and basically continued that work with Labyrinth for every scene that didn't have someone singing. The way his involvement has been painted as disjointed and completely unrelated to the Bowie songs feels a bit harsh, especially considering how involved he and Bowie were with each other in the production. When Bowie signed the contracts, Jones accompanied Henson in person, so the two could actually discuss how they would go about doing the soundtrack. It was decided that Jones would play off of the Bowie songs and incorporate those melodies into the soundtrack, which created a more rich and poignant musical dimension for the film. Basically, Jones was completely bespoke to Bowie, and it shows. That the soundtrack would include some of his pieces isn't necessarily padding, as much as a fair compromise between two musicians. But the biggest clue to Labyrinth's importance for Bowie comes, non-surprisingly, from his own words back in the day.
I've always felt, for a long time now, I felt that rock and cinema were destined to meet. I think MTV has subsequently become a proving ground that people will watch music and action for considerable lengths of time.
And this just makes a lot of sense in hindsight. The way MTV vastly popularized the music video format during the 80s goes hand in hand with Bowie's rise in mainstream appeal during that same time, where his own videos would get more and more ambitious. Notable was Yasin for Blue Jean from 1984, which resembles a short film more than a music video, with a full-blown story written by Bowie himself, truly giving credence to his idea that music and film could merge together. And in that perspective, Labyrinth can easily be argued as a culmination of his greater ambitions in extending his artistic work during that era. The point where music video was brought to the theaters, a conclusion which is probably completely lost if you don't allow the film to be given that weight. What we're getting at is that context is in many ways manufactured through the care you put into legitimizing and acknowledging certain things in cultural writing. This whole video is in many ways filling in a baffling hole we discovered in our baseline appreciation for Labyrinth, a sort of declaration that the film and Bowie's work on it can indeed be seen as important and relevant, if you just will it. What aspects of himself did Bowie pour into this film and the score? Are they all written through a persona perspective of Jareth? Who knows? The exciting prospect is that a thorough analysis of the songs in conjunction with a deep dive into the film grants them all a certain deeper meaning. In many ways they can work on their own. Most of them will probably read as breakup songs in a vacuum. And that's a cool double meaning to them. But the fact that they fit so well into the film despite this is admirable. These songs are clearly channels for Bowie to express many of the present themes in the film, and by that metric, a lot of him surely must be injected here. What is he telling us through the songs if not his own views on the narrative and message of the film? Sure, it's Bowie within a framework, but it's still as unmistakably Bowie as ever. In our eyes, Labyrinth isn't just a great film with cool Bowie songs. It's a standout chapter in his career for quite simply being a very unique expression of him. This is basically the one time where he could meld acting and songwriting in a pot, creating a musical. Surely, that has to amount to something. At the time, the film was criticized for being a bit messy and incoherent. But I don't know, maybe if Roger Ebert had listened to the soundtrack a bit and thought about it all for 2 seconds, he would have been able to parse this kid's film. Poor baby boy. Was Labyrinth unfairly judged at the time? Oh, absolutely. Undoubtedly. But it's not just that this immediate knee-jerk reaction to it banished it to relative obscurity for many years. The real tragedy is how the reluctance of the old guard to acknowledge the subsequent relevance of the film has led Bowie's work on it to be disregarded. In hindsight, most of his 80s output has been criticized as very of the times. The decade did mark a point where Bowie stopped leading and instead started following others. The sensibilities are less timeless and a bit too mainstream with little of the experimental and bold depth that otherwise enriches his other periods. This is fairly agreeable stuff, and while still having some surprisingly enjoyable material, it's easy to feel this period is at this point so dated that it's alienating. However, in contrast, Labyrinth had a much-needed firm direction for Bowie to cling onto that guided the project into still feeling quite fresh, even to this day. The context supplied by the film helps hold the songs down to a certain theme that feel written less for the radio and more for the sincerity of the project. In that regard, we would absolutely argue that Labyrinth is among his best 80s material and a shining beacon in that landscape that reveals that even in his most sellout period, there was always a depth to his songwriting that never went away. An absolute gem. And hopefully, with time, our maturing generation will make that clear.
Next time on Transparency, the gamers are assaulting Balan Wonderworld with slander and low review scores. Can Kiki and Alicia rally the powers of discourse to defend the reputation of a game on the ropes? Can Balan Wonderworld be redeemed? Find out next time on Transparency.
Thank you for watching all the way to the end. This one was a bit more troublesome to finalize than we anticipated, but we hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. We're a bit bummed out about the NFT shit being revealed after we spent so much time on this, but oh well, what are you gonna do? We'll talk more about it in the audio companion probably. As usual, we'd like to thank our patrons and give a big welcome to our newcomer ghosts. Tim Bentvilsen, Rocky Dennis, Ben, Bacon Blob, Gluga, Sophie Nordgren, Gringo, Rain Pultz, Harry Negus, And a huge special thanks to our top tier supporters, who are Andrew Jones, Luke, All Purpose Nobody, Afayette, Ben Clark, Bibi the Bitch, Cult of Diana, Ember, Emrasa, Gage McColgan, Intanjan, Joel Nilsson, Klaus Morals, Matthias Graman, Meowmix64, Mary Mello, Mosling, Nate Kiernan, Nishtsvet, Radar of the Stars, TB Skyan, Vox, Abigail Neal, Ice, Amanda Rönne Idenge, Andreas, Anonymous, Eric Parkinson, Basklin, Billy Moran, Botch Frivarg, Kathleen Thomas, Charles Goldhaber, Chloe Strange, Cody Sis, Eli Bergmas, Ephemeral Mist, Floof Fist, Il Caesar, Indigo Trans, J Mission, Leinen, Marika, Mar B, Max Miller, Mitch Haley, Nathan Schaff, Never Haunting You, Rivokas Magma, Scott from NerdSync, Silly Rookie, Skyhoppers, Sweet Pink, Silvari Gata, Tobias Mattsson, VG, Vexelbun, and C33. As you saw, next time will be our big defense of Balan Wonderworld, or whatever you want to call it. Knowing us, it will probably be longer than we'd expect, so look forward to that sometime around next month, I guess. Until then, have a good one, friends, and get plenty of sleep.